Welcome to the SEI Podcast Series, a production of the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. A transcript of today's podcast is posted on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts.
Welcome to the SEI Podcast Series. My name is Suzanne Miller, and I'm a principal investigator in the SEI Software Solution Division. Today, I am joined by my colleague and friend, Chris Alberts, a principal cybersecurity analyst in the SEI CERT division. Today, we're going to talk about a method for assessing cloud adoption risk that Chris has developed. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So you've been a guest on our show, but it's been a while. You're a pre-COVID guest, so
Right.
Welcome back. Let's start by having you tell us, what is it about the SEI that brought you here, and what kind of work do you do here?
So before the SEI, I was working in the area of robotics. I was developing robotic systems, mobile robots for hazardous environments. And part of doing that, you have to be very good at managing risk. And so I had started building up this interest in risk management, especially with respect to technology. And the SEI had an active risk management program, and I joined that program back in 1995. And I focused initially on software risk management, and then I transitioned over to cybersecurity risk management shortly after that, focusing initially on operational security. And today I've kind of moved left in the life cycle. I'm looking at how to build security in the system. So I'm looking at managing risk early during acquisition and development of software-reliant systems.
Excellent. And many of the methods that you have built or with yourself and with colleagues have been very useful for different aspects of that, the octave,
Right.
operational critical threat analysis. And then mission risk diagnostic is one that I'm also familiar with that is really the foundation for this recent set of adoption risks that we're talking about. Tell us a little bit about mission risk diagnostic and what it's been able to do for the people that have important missions that they need to protect.
So we started this work probably about 15 years ago with the initial work with the mission risk diagnostic. And it's kind of a quick hit diagnostic or a health check is the way I often refer to it, to kind of give you a quick snapshot of what your major risk factors are. And we can use it on mission threads, business processes, organizational initiatives, things of that nature. And we started focusing on software risk in terms of acquisition and development projects. And then we've also done versions. We did an early version on technology transition for one of our customers, and then did other versions on software security, supply chain, incident management. We did several pilots with that one as well. So we've done a range of different assessments based on the mission risk diagnostic. I kind of focus on there's the platform for the mission risk diagnostic, and there are different sets of risk factors that we've developed consistent with that platform.
So this is the latest, and this is related to cloud adoption. And why don't you give us sort of the variety of organizational and technical factors that you have found can affect an organization's cloud initiative, especially affected adversely. So let's talk about the factors themselves a little bit.
When we look at an organizational initiative like adopting cloud technologies, where we often start with is some of the basics, planning and preparation activities. Do you have the right budget for what you're doing? Have you set a reasonable schedule? Do you have the right organizational capability to do this work? If you're reaching out for third-party assistance, do you have that lined up? Then there's also governance and management issues, looking at things like change management, managing your suppliers. And one of the things to think about with cloud technologies is they're provided by third parties. So supplier management is a key part of that. Then you're getting around to the actual execution of the activities. So as you're making this transition or adopting these technologies, there's engineering activities you're looking at, from requirements,
Right.
architecture, all the way through test and evaluation, and then the initial deployment. And then there's quality of service issues you need to be aware of as well. Things in nature, in terms of cloud, you're looking at performance, agility, security, scalability, things of that nature.
Gotcha. So a lot of these are a mix of technical and what we would call socio-technical
Right,
factors.
right.
And in our experience, in you and I both have experience in researching technology transition. It's those socio-technical factors that often are the ones that are the make or break. The technical is probably where you're going to find other methods that would address risk factors, because everybody's got a way to rank themselves on their technical and quality of service capabilities, but not so much in the did you plan right for this, and do you have governance structures to make sure that people are using this correctly, and things like that.
Right.
So when I read the blog post, I was really happy to see that we, continuing on with that theme of socio-technical is important. So the method is one that you said is based on the mission risk diagnostic platform. For people that are not familiar with that, could you just give us a little bit of an overview of the method and sort of what makes it more of a health check diagnostic as opposed to an in-depth kind of risk approach?
Sure. So we started with the, as I said, started developing the mission risk diagnostic about 15 years ago, and the idea was to provide a broad-based kind of initial diagnostic of an organization's capability in a given area. And one of the I often draw a parallel to a medical paradigm when I discuss this. So that you can think of the a mission risk diagnostic as kind of equivalent to going to your primary care physician. So it's a lot of simple, and I'll talk a minute specifically how we structured it. But you're doing some basic things. Like when you go to your PCP, they'll check your temperature, your blood pressure, and a few things like that. And if there's some type of an issue, then they'll have you do an ultrasound or an MRI or something of that nature. So we position this as the health check above, and we have deep dive techniques that are associated with it and can provide specific information to us that relate to what we find in the mission risk diagnostic. For example, we have a technique called the Security Engineering Risk Analysis Method, or CERT, that looks at architectural risk. So if we find an issue with the architecture, we can do a deep dive into the architecture. We have another one that looks at leading practices for building security, and if we notice that there's a problem with the way that the organization is executing its practices, we can do a deep dive into do a practice-based assessment as well. But so we have designed this to be kind of a way to do a quick check of the areas where the major risk areas on an organizational initiative or a mission threat are. And so basically, each of these is somewhere between 15 and 25 questions. For cloud adoption, it turned out to be 24 questions. They're yes/no questions. And we also allow for variance or responses related to probability. So the responses typically are yes, likely yes, equal likely yes and no, likely no, and no. And so that gives you an idea of kind of the probability nature against each of these risk factors. And
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I'm not going to get details of what all the problems are. I'm really going to get that indicator of this is an area that we're probably okay. We're probably good on planning, but we're not so good on how we establish quality of service. And so we need to go deeper into quality of service. For this set of factors, do you have the sort of detailed kinds of activities yet, or is that still some of the research that you have yet to do?
Well, very svery to what we've done here with the mission risk diagnostic. We have so most of our analysis methods can be adapted to various types of technologies. So I mentioned the security engineering risk analysis, or CERT method. We've done that on all kinds of technologies, including we did a pilot of that with cloud in a cloud environment several years ago. So much like the mission risk diagnostic, we can do these follow-on
Okay.
assessments in a variety of environments.
Okay. So that some of the magic is that these techniques can be applied to multiple kinds of technologies, and this is the sort of latest in the set that you're applying it to. So you don't necessarily have instead of Sierra, you don't have Kira cloud.
No.
You don't have Kira yet, but you might if it turns out that cloud is such a big deal that it has its own sort of special flavor of that. You could go there.
Right.
Okay. So the MRD has been piloted in the field extensively, but how new is this set of cloud assessment risk factors, and have you had any chance to pilot this in the field yet?
Well, they're very new. So about a year ago, was kind of done as a side project. We had the opportunity to look at adapting the mission risk diagnostic to the cloud environment, and so we kind of brought together three types of information as we did this. We had done various technology adoption of risk assessments in the past, so we had kind of that as a basis to start with. Within the documentation within the community, Google and Microsoft and Amazon all have cloud adoption frameworks that they've published, and so they're publicly available. So we mined those as well. And then, as you know, the SEI has a lot of people with cloud experience, and we've consulted with them as well. So we took these three diverse sets of data and put them together and came up with this initial set of cloud adoption risk factors. Okay. Now, we have not piloted them yet. This is basically when we put together a new set of risk factors, the first step is to do what we just did, mine the available information and use this as a starting point.
Okay. And by publishing it to the field, you'll get interest from people from various places. And I assume that you have interest in collaborating with organizations in the DoD and commercial, DHS, right, sort of across a wide breadth. So we have that info at sei.cmu.edu email that is very useful to all of us. That's a great place for people that are interested in collaborating on this to contact you. But I also know that the way that historically you have built your methods, they are quite self-service as well. And so I think, am I correct in saying you're welcoming people to send you, hey, here's what happened. Here's the results that we got from when we applied this on our own. And then that's another way you can get feedback on, why did you ask us this question? That turned out to be like totally weird and, took us down a rat hole. And why do we do that? And that kind of dialogue I know has happened in the past as well.
Yeah, so people who self-apply, we'd love to get their feedback. And a lot of people, especially with this method, just take it and run with it. And often we don't even hear back from them. Or sometimes we'll be at a conference or some other place where you run into somebody and said, oh yeah, I used this method and I found it very useful. But we like to get feedback that way from people who've applied it. And we also like to pilot these when the opportunity arises as well.
Sure. Okay. I'm excited about this. I may actually end up being one of your users for this. We'll talk about that offline. But I want to mention for a minute, just sort of transition in general. And I know your history, you're very, very focused on making resources available to people for self-serve so that they can do as much as they can on their own. What resources are available beyond the blog post, and where can they be found? And then we'll make sure that all the audience gets links to all of those places as part of the transcript.
Right. So we've published a lot of information on the mission risk diagnostic related to some of the different variants that we've done. I think the most published versions are for the software version, software project version, and the incident management version. And those are available on the SEI website. In addition to the blog post, we have a white paper that accompanies it for the cloud adoption version. Basically, and we have a set on developing the risk factors that we publish, a technical report that we published several years ago. we call that at that point in time we were calling the risk factors mission drivers. So
Right.
it's a focus on how do you develop a set of risk factors for any unique situation that you look at. So we have a number of things published throughout the years. Cloud adoption, the white paper and the blog post right now is all that's available.
Okay. But so the mission drivers technical report, if people are really interested in how this developed and they want to extend this for their own particular cloud adoption context, then they could actually go to that and say, what are some other drivers that we should be looking at?
Right.
If we're a medical device firm or, whatever the particular context is.
Yeah. So that area kind of it breaks down into 5 or 6 areas that you should think about when you're identifying drivers or risk factors related to whatever problem you're looking at. And that's actually comes down to the approach that we take when we develop them. That kind of is a way of documenting how we approach the problem.
Yep. You're one of the technologists that gives away the secret sauce. And I find it, I really find it wonderful because it does make it more accessible. But I also am always surprised at how few people actually use it. It's like we don't really want to know the secret sauce. We just want you to make us the dinner.
Right, right.
So it's an interesting thing to reflect on sometimes. All right, I want to know what's next for you. So you are someone who does not sit still and does not rest on your laurels. So what are you thinking about now, and what should I be talking to you about in a few months?
Well, one of the ongoing tasks I'm working on is the CERT method, and so we've been working on that for about 5 years or so. And what we're doing right now with respect to that is we have a concept called threat archetypes, and so these are basically our vision. A long-term vision is to create a library of these archetypes that basically, based on system type, you could then identify a set of threats that you need to consider for that type of system. So that's something we're doing. That's now one of our background activities, but something that we're looking to hopefully in the next fiscal year do a little bit more aggressively. The focus right now that I'm working on is we have been developing a set of cybersecurity engineering practices, leading practices across the life cycle. And a couple of years ago, we started this work. We did also built an accompanying assessment called the Cybersecurity Engineering Review, or CSER, that we used to assess a program against these leading practices. So recently, I would say recently, about a year ago, I started collaborating with several colleagues across the SEI, and we're taking the engineering practices along with some supplier management practices, think of the supply chain risk management practices, program management practices, and putting them together in a broader framework called the acquisition security framework. And so we're about 2/3 of the way done with developing that. And that'll give us an opportunity to look at a program across the life cycle, look at their in-house engineering activities, their contractors' activities, as well as any third-party software that they're using, and look at how they're putting all that together and creating some of these complex systems that we see these days.
Yep. So I know from having participated in threat modeling workshops as one of the program participants, I'm loving the idea of the threat archetypes, because that is really hard to wrap your head around. It takes, I think it took me almost a whole day before I could get into the space for doing that. So I hope that work goes forward quickly.
Yeah, we have an initial white paper on that on the SEI website that people can refer to as well. So we've structured how we, at least an initial prototype of how we're looking at documenting these archetypes, and so people can look at that and the idea. It seems like the idea of putting them together in a library really resonates with people.
Yeah. It certainly does with me. So, well, I want to thank you again for joining us today, Chris. I'm always interested in what's got you going and the kinds of things you're doing, because you're wonderful at the outreach and making sure that your work is accessible to the community. So I know that is going to be important to our readers. And I know there are lots of DoD and other programs that are in the middle of moving to cloud-based systems for doing their work. So this is really important content for them to be thinking about. So thank you.
Thanks.
I do want to say to our audience that you can get this podcast, video, audio, SoundCloud. My favorite, of course, the SEI YouTube channel. And so please access it however is best for you. As I said earlier, we will have links to all the resources we mentioned in the transcript. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this very fine day.
Thanks for joining us. This episode is available where you download podcasts, including SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. It is also available on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts and the SEI's YouTube channel. This copyrighted work is made available through the Software Engineering Institute, a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. For more information about the SEI and this work, please visit www.sei.cmu.edu. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you.